Yes, President Putin and Prime Minister Modi have concluded another very significant bilateral summit here in New Delhi. India and Russia today signed the mega $5.6 billion deal for the S-400 air defense system, though they remain tight-lipped on the pricing mechanism. Remember, the US is yet to grant a waiver from CAATSA sanctions. CAATSA, or Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act. Over the last 24 hours, Prime Minister Modi and President Putin spent at least 6 hours with each other. Major focus on connectivity and trade, with both sides agreeing that trade at $10 billion currently is clearly below par. Significantly, both sides agreed to promote trade in national currencies. In the backdrop of US sanctions on Iran and Russia, it is important to note that both sides welcomed the proposed trilateral meeting of Russia, Iran and India to transport goods to Russia through Iran. Let's take this discussion forward. Joining us now is the former Vice Chief of the Air Force, Air Marshal R.K. Sharma. In our studios here in New Delhi, we are joined by former Foreign Secretary Shashank and also Senior Advisor of the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Richard M. Rosso. He's joining us all the way from Washington. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. But Foreign Secretary Shashank, I'd like to put this question to you first. The question is about the S-400 air defense system. So much was talked about this deal. This was supposed to be a deal for $5.5 billion, but both leaders don't mention it in their press statements. This is not there in the list of MOUs. It is packed away in the 45th paragraph of the joint statement. What does this signify?
Well, on the first reading, it seems that it must be due to the complications because of the Congressional Act passed last year in the United States, which of course has given certain exceptions which can be made by the President of the US. But it remains a ticklish point. But the other thing is that recently we have seen how some of the defense deals have come for domestic scrutiny at the political level within India. And therefore, since we are moving into the election season in the next few months, it might be also considered useful just to keep it as one of the technical agreements, because afterwards it's for the security of the country and not necessarily for scoring political points.
All right.
And thirdly, we know that China has already signed this agreement. They are going to get a large number of these S-400 anti-missile systems. And therefore, it's extremely important for India to get them. So getting them is more important rather than the process and how to put it across in a Prime Minister's statement or in a joint statement.
Simply because we're yet to work out a payment mechanism, no clarity on whether US would come forward and give that waiver as well. But Richard, what do you think? How would Washington be looking at this entire visit of President Putin? We signed the S-400 deal, but when we asked our top sources in the government about the payment mechanism, they said we are yet to work this out, and when we do work this out, we won't tell you when the first payment is made.
Well, I think the United States has known for a long time that India was headed on this trajectory. Prime Minister Modi's statement before he left for Russia earlier this year, where he said we're not going to let foreign countries decide from whom we make defense purchases, I think that pretty much set in stone this track. So no surprises here. The fact that Congress has widened the application of waivers somewhat, with India clearly in mind, that was stated a number of times by administration officials, as well as my own meetings with members of Congress and their staff. And the fact that we had a very successful U.S.-India 2+2, despite the fact that the S-400 was so clearly on the front page, I think the United States is doing what it can to move through this, knowing that India is going to complete this deal.
Okay, so you're saying that it's quite clear that the waiver is going to come by.
Well, that's out of my hands, so there is no complete clarity on this. You know, you saw with the widening of the waiver, the House of Representatives chose to do so in their version of the National Defense Authorization Act legislation. The Senate did not. So there's not complete unanimity that anybody should be given waivers necessarily for deep relations that benefit Russia's military and intelligence agencies. So I can't sit here and say that I know that there's complete clarity they plan to do it, but everybody's moving at a pace and in a direction that shows that there's an intent to do so. But surprises always happen, as with any democracy.
Okay. Exactly. And during the 2+2, there was an acknowledgement of the fact that India is reliant on Russia for its defense imports and defense technology. Air Marshal R.K. Sharma, if I can get you in over here. We've been talking about the S-400, not for the last 1 week, for the past many years. How important was it to get it right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Firstly, good evening. You're right. This discussions on the S-400 have been on for at least last 6 years, 2012 onwards, if I recollect. And post these discussions, now that it has finally been concluded, I think that's it's a great event for the Indian Air Force. How important it is? Yes. By the way, if S-400 deal is signed anywhere in the world with anybody, is going to make front page news, because air defense missile system like an S-400 doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. It is the most lethal system and the most unique and comprehensive system that is fielded in the world today. There is no parallel. And for our national security needs, it was imperative that we get this system, and I think that has happened now. Good.
Right, and it definitely gives us an advantage
anything else?
over Pakistan. It's the most cutting-edge technology in the world.
Yes, it is the most cutting-edge technology in the world. Firstly, if it's okay, I can explain the concept behind this system and why there is no parallel to this. Is that okay? Can I do that?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. You see, the air defense, of an airspace, it runs into layers. You have long-range missiles, you have medium-range missiles, and you have short-range and very short-range missiles. It's called a layered air defense system. So when you need to protect vital areas and vital points and strategic areas and critical areas, you have to see what is the kind of missile system that you require to protect it. Will a short-range system do or a long-range system do? Because they're all separate systems. This one is unique because it has the complete layer itself in one system. The missiles range from 400 kilometers through 250, 200 kilometers, 100 kilometers to medium range, right down to 40 kilometers. So a comprehensive system like this does not exist, and therefore it makes it unique. Yes, now what was needed for our national security? Right. If I recollect, our requirement would have been in the region for a large coverage in the region of about 10 to 12 system. But one has to draw the balance, and then you've got to draw a line as to what is your most critical need and what can you do to start with. I think 5 systems is the way to go.
Okay, 5 systems is the way to go, and the air chief, the present air chief, has already said that the deliveries will begin in 2 years from now. But Mr. Shashank, if I can come to you, over the last couple of years, ever since the new government came to power in 2014, I think there's also a feeling in Moscow, in Russia, that India is moving very close to the United States. So do you think it was very important to sign this deal this time? Because if it didn't happen right now, our relations with Russia could have drifted. Do you feel that?
Well, if this drift was noticed by the Indian policymakers, it was not because of the bilateral relationship. It is really due to the international developments and particularly the pressures which are being mounted on Russia by the Western countries. Therefore, Russia perhaps felt that since India was trying to befriend the Western countries and especially the United States, so maybe it was time to build new friendships in the region with countries like China and Pakistan. With China, they were becoming almost like a junior partner. And with Pakistan, they felt that they would be able to control the terrorists in the Russian territory who are having their bases and training camps, etc., in Pakistan and Afghanistan. So India had to move quickly. And therefore, it is not just a question of protecting itself from China or from terrorists coming from Pakistan, but also to ensure that Asia remains an area of peace and stability, and Russia, which has been a linchpin, which has been the most trustworthy friend of India over the last 70 years, does not feel that India is moving away in such a manner that it wants to now cut off the relationship with Russia.
Okay.
So I think that has changed. And Prime Minister Modi met in Sochi, President Putin, and I think that was really the game changer. And now that we have gone ahead, we have made the relationship so comprehensive that it's not just the defense, but in so many areas we are going to move ahead.
So S-400 is really the testament to our commitment to the India-Russia partnership, so to say.
Well, that is, yes. I mean, we have gone ahead, and I think the Americans have understood the situation, but they have their congressional issues which they need to sort out. That is for them to decide how to do that.
All right, let me go across to Richard now. Richard, you know, when it came to international relations, there was a discussion on the JCPOA. There was also a discussion on the sanctions. Though US was not mentioned specifically, both sides shared the view that implementation in good faith of generally recognized principles and rules of international law excludes practices of double standards or imposition by some states of their will on others, and consider imposition of unilateral coercive measures as not based on international law. How do you see these statements coming from India?
Well, clearly, lines like that could be referencing not just the United States, although I'm certain in this context we would certainly be front of mind as they say things like that. It has been difficult, I know, for a lot of countries to try to understand, and even for those of us in Washington, on the steps that the Trump administration may take with countries that, you know, maybe we'd had some progress in relations before, but suddenly you see a quick snap there. So, you know, if I'm sitting outside the United States and sometimes even here in Washington itself, I can understand those sentiments. Things are changing very rapidly in Washington, unafraid to, I think, break from paths that existed before and move in new directions. Whether or not that means that, you know, that Russia and India are going to redevelop a much stronger relationship in ways that run counter to what the United States and India have been doing, I don't know that's necessarily the case because, you know, long term, I think there's a lot more strategic overlap between what the United States and India are looking at in Asia than there is any medium territory between Russia and India. So statements like this that seem to be counter to the United States, if you read it one way, I'm not terribly concerned because I do think that both Washington and Delhi, they do know that we do have shared strategic interests, and I think we'll continue on our favorable path.
All right. I believe Mr. R.K. Sharma, Air Marshal R.K. Sharma wants to come in. And R.K. Sharma, I also want to ask you about this fact. You know, we asked our sources in the government why there were no ceremonies. You had Vladimir Putin coming here. He's such a close partner of India. And they said that there was a request from Kremlin to keep this event low-key because they wanted to focus on substantial issues. Over to you now, Air Marshal Sharma.
Yes, that's... Yes, you know, that's sort of possible, you know, given the, you know, nature of discussions that are taking place in international media regarding this acquisition vis-a-vis the CAATSA, etc. It's understandable at the politico-diplomatic level if you want to keep it low-key, but it doesn't take away from the fact that you have inked a deal and that deal will be known tomorrow morning the world over. Rather, there have been more sensitive deals earlier, for example, you know, the leasing of the Chakra, the, you know, other sort of acquisitions that have taken place from Russia, and no president or prime minister has come here. This is an event, and there are many such acquisitions which will take place from Russia. But I need to come in on one point regarding this color about, you know, going closer to Russia or closer to America. As a military man, I would like to see it that way because that way, you know, as I had suggested that this has been under discussion for at least 6 years now. In between these 6 years, we have been able to acquire weapon systems from US as well. That is the, you know, C-130J aircraft, the P-8I, we have got the Globemaster. We have acquired weapon systems. We are going to acquire weapon systems from France as well. So it is what serves our national interests best, and I think the government has done well to continue to plod on this deal and finally bring it to fruition. I think if you look at it in a national interest, I wouldn't look at it as, you know, going closer here or closer there. The reason for this deal to be inked and for this acquisition to take place really has nothing to do with us going either closer to Russia or to US. I think it is the national interest which counted first.
Yeah. And also, and many say that this technology was not available with the United States or anybody else in the world. So therefore, it's important to go ahead, irrespective of whether the US liked it or not. Let's focus on trade, because trade was a big component of the talks. Richard, both Putin and Prime Minister Modi agreed that trade at $10.17 billion as it stands currently is clearly below par. There was a lot of discussion on increasing trade to $30 billion by 2025. Do you think it's a realistic target, keeping the current issues in mind?
Well, it could be. You know, I think with the United States and India, governments managing expansion of trade is a little bit difficult because so much of what happens between our two countries is really driven by the private sector, IT services, and so many other areas. But when you think about Russia's trade relations with India, certainly from the Russia viewpoint, when they look at, you know, exporting things like energy and defense material, a lot of those decisions will be made government to government, or at least with public sector enterprises. So I think India and Russia setting a trade target, considering that a lot of their trade is actually guided by the government or government-owned companies, it's a bit easier to hit a target. It's a lofty goal. I can't be certain, of course, that they'll make it, and it sort of depends on what happens with India's other trade relationships. But if they start dialing down energy imports from Iran, and if they do continue to increase acquisition of Russian defense material, then it probably is feasible to hit that target.
It's interesting when you're talking about oil imports from Iran, and Ambassador Shashank, I'd like to get you in over here. President Putin, and this is interesting, the Prime Minister was concerned about rising fuel prices and the impact on the Indian economy. And President Putin said that if there is a need, Russia could increase the global oil supply. What do you think was the larger message here? And Indian government also saying that we'll continue our oil imports from Iran in the days to come as well.
Well, this CAATSA applies to both Russia and Iran. And India has strategic relations with both these countries. With regard to Iran, we have this trilateral partnership with including Afghanistan, which is also a priority area for the United States and for Russia. Therefore, it's important that we need to continue with our energy security, which is part of our national security. And for that, there's using Shah Bahar port or to go for supplies to Russia. And for energy cooperation with Iran, I think it will continue, and I have no doubt at all, because we did try to reduce our imports from Iran, even last time when the sanctions were imposed on Iran, but we could not bring it down to zero. And really, we cannot afford to do that, because the people in India will not be very happy with any government in India which succumbs to pressures from outside countries in order to cut down its own energy security or its national security.
Okay.
And Russia has always been helpful. Whenever we were short of diesel, etc., in the past, they were able to help us.
Right.
We have also taken part in Sakhalin-1 in the oil sector project. The OVL has also gone in with some collaborations of Western companies to acquire some other oil equity in Russia. So Russia and India have old partnership even in the oil and energy sector. And I have no doubt that from time to time we have discussed even how to get some pipelines from Russia across to India. Now, how to do it.
There was a large focus on connectivity as well, now North-South corridor as well. And that's where I'd like to get in Air Marshal R.K. Sharma. Air Marshal R.K. Sharma, this joint statement that we're talking about, it ran into 65 paragraphs. It was an exhaustive joint statement. And President Putin in the meeting stressed on the fact that Russia would like to offer civilian aircraft, passenger jets to India, offer their railway technology, and also increase connectivity in a big way. So do you think that Russia this time was really keen to broad-base the partnership? Whenever we think about Russia, a common man would think about defense, would think about fighter jets, the Sukhois, the S-400, but this was an attempt by Russia to broad-base the partnership?
Yes, I would completely agree with you on that. What limited reading that I have done of the past agreements with Russia, none have been in such great detail spelling out the roadmap and the contours of what our relation should be going ahead as the one that I have read today. So you're absolutely right. I think this is not just a joint statement or a sort of thing. It is, I think it lays down the roadmap for our strategic partnership up ahead. So it is very significant, and whether it be railways or energy security, definitely. Defense has always been there, right from 1955 onwards. I mean, that's a given. And it is just that, we have to be careful about what we need and, what it costs us and what its sort of specifications are. Apart from that, defense is a given. But the kind of relationship that we have now defined for going ahead, I thought it is significant, and yes, it is very meaningful. No doubt about that.
Right. So meaningful discussions on defense and a clear intent to broad-base the partnership. And Richard, if I can get you in on what the Russian president was really stressing on: civilian aircraft, railway technology, or MOUs on railway universities. The Prime Minister highlighting that the Russian economy needs to be open for the Indian IT industry, the pharma industry as well. Do you think these are significant steps towards increasing Russia-India bilateral trade in the days and weeks to come?
Well, only time will tell on whether they're going to take tangible steps to actually follow through on these kind of agreements. I think by and large, they want to export advanced technology in areas, rail and aerospace, where they have it. I think people-to-people connections we certainly would welcome because, as we see President Putin continue to further his grip on Russian society, giving them a beacon of light for what openness, transparency, democracy means, if that's going to be a closer relationship people-to-people with India, that's something that I think the United States should welcome and encourage. Anything that's not directly aiding, military and intelligence operations around the world and such. So I think the tangible benefits of trade, that's to be seen in the future. Russia would like to export more, but I think the people-to-people connections, if that really starts to recur again and bloom, it's going to be good for Russian society overall to get a deeper taste of Indian culture and all the good things that I see in India.
Okay, and my final question to M. Marshall Sharma as we wrap. M. Marshall Sharma, the Prime Minister conveyed that we want to move from a buyer-seller relationship to a joint development and a joint research sort of development, despite the fact that our relationship, our defense relationship with Russia goes back decades. Do you think we're doing enough of joint production? And this is an area of concern, according to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. This is the point I wanted to raise. You see, this relationship to do with joint production and manufacturing in India vis-a-vis Russian equipment has been there for decades in the past. I mean, you can go back to the MiG-21 series and the Sukhois now and their upgrades and what have you. Same goes for the design of, Russian design of ships for Indian Navy. So it's been there. But I think this is one point I missed during this time when I read the press note. I thought there could have been a little more emphasis, this is my personal view, on make in India of defense equipment. There could have been a slightly larger emphasis because that is where we seem to be slipping with the Russians now of late. So if that could have been brought in, that would have been fine, including a little more emphasis on defense science and technology with our research institutes as well. Otherwise, manufacturing in India and this buyer-seller relationship, this has long been, the case with Russians.
All right, M. Marshal R.K. Sharma, Foreign Secretary, former Foreign Secretary Shashank, and Richard Rosso, thank you very much for joining us on this discussion. We're going to take a short break here on CNBC TV 18. When we